Thank you. I'm Mr. Lehner, and welcome to a basketball edition of Mr. Lehner's Math Extravaganza. Now, you might be wondering, what does basketball have to do with math, and specifically with who is the best? Well, when working with math, we can work with fractions, decimals, and percents. And today, we're going to take a look at how you can use the sport of basketball to work with percents. Let's take a look at our first problem. It says, who is the best? It says, who is the better free throw shooter, Mr. Lehner or Mr. Brusek? Mr. Lehner made 122 out of 144 free throws, and Mr. Brusek made 214 out of 260. One of the things we can take a look at to help us with this free throw percentage is something called benchmark. We talked about benchmark fractions. These are benchmark percents. So, here's Mr. Lehner, here's Mr. Brusek. We have 0%, 25, 50, 75, and 100%. It's just like our thermometers on here. This is 1/4 or 25%, 2/4 or 50%, 3/4 which is 75%, and 4/4 which is 100%. But now we're looking at the free throws here. We both shot a different number of free throws, so we want to find out who is the better free throw shooter. Well, if Mr. Lehner took 144 free throws, and I wanted to use my benchmark fractions here, I could take 144 and divide it by 4 to get my 25%. If I do that, 36 makes out of 144 would be 25%. Well, what about 50% then? I can either take half of 144 or double 36 to get 72 makes. 108 makes would be 75%. And lastly, all the free throws made would be 100%, which is 144. So when looking at this original problem right here, we know that Mr. Lehner made 122 out of 144. So this is where we can use our calculator to help us. I'm going to go ahead and turn my calculator on. I'm going to do 122 divided by 144, so the number of makes divided by the number of shots attempted. And that gives me a percent of 84.7, which is just about 85. So if I'm looking at my benchmark fractions here, well, here's 75 and 100, so it has to be somewhere in between here, and I would guesstimate that 85 would be right about there, about 85%, or 122 makes would be right about here in our tape diagram. Now let's take a look at Mr. Brusek. He shot 260 and made 214. Again, I'm going to use my benchmarks here. If he shot 260, I'm going to divide 260 by 4 to get 25%. When I do that, I come up with 65. Again, I can take half of this number, is 130 is 50%, add another 65, it's 195, and then 260 out of 260 would be all free throws made. Now again, let's look at what Mr. Brusek did. He made 214 out of 260. So again, I'm going to look at my calculator, type in 214, divide it by 260, and that leaves me with 82.3%. So when plotting the 82.3%, I might say that that's about, if I can get this day, that's about right there. So when looking at my two numbers and using my benchmark here, I would say that Mr. Lehner is a slightly better free throw shooter than Mr. Brusek by looking at our benchmarks here. Even though we took two different amounts of free throw shots, I used the percentage to show who was the better free throw shooter. And again, using these benchmark percents can help us kind of guesstimate when we're not looking for an exact number. Alright, let's take a look at another one. This time, I don't know if I can get our stickies off here. This time, in this problem, it's Mr. Lehner against the 6th grade students. There we go. And try this guy. Alright. This time it's me against you guys, the 6th grade class. It says, who is the better free throw shooter, Mr. Lehner or a 6th grade class? Mr. Lehner has made 288 out of 325, and the 6th graders made 206 out of 230. Now, you may have noticed something different in this problem. I have now broken up my fraction bar here into 10 different places, with each one going by 10%. what I'd like you to do is go ahead and get out that paper, have that pencil ready to go, and I'd like you to try and solve this problem. Go ahead and pause the video. Okay, when examining this problem, I'm going to start with Mr. Lehner's bar up here. He made 288 out of 325. Well, if I'm using my benchmark percents, and this is by 10 this time, I have to figure out, well, what's 10% of 325? One way to do that is to take 325 and divide it by 10. If I do that, I'm going to get 32.5 or 32.5. So for every 10% of 325, it's going to be 32.5. And it becomes 65, 97.5, 130, 162.5, 195, 70%, 227.5, 260, 292.5, then finally 10/10 of 325 is 325. So I've broken down each percent of my free throws. I basically just found 10% of 325 working with this. Now, it says that Mr. Lehner made 288 out of the 325. So again, I'm going to use my handy dandy little calculator here. And I'm going to do 288 divided by 325. Oop, let's try that again. 288 divided by 325. And that gives me 88.6%. So if I'm looking at my percents here, 88%. It's very close to 90. But it's not quite there. So I'm going to kind of put him right there. He's almost at, let's try that again. He's almost at 90, but he's not quite there. A little bit off, but he's almost at 90. All right, so let's take a look at our sixth graders here. So the sixth graders took 230 shots. So when figuring this out, what was I supposed to do again? Oh, that's right. I got to divide that by 10. So if I divide 230 by 10, wait, why am I dividing it by 10 again? Oh, that's right, because there's 10 strips here. So I'm using that as my benchmark. So if I take 230 and divide it by 10, I'm going to get 23. So 10% of 230 is 23. 20% of 230 is 46. 30% is 69. 40% is 92. And so forth, all the way up into 100%, which is 230. So now I have my numbers here. Let's take a look at what the sixth graders made. They made 206 out of 230, so again, use my calculator, 206 divided by 230, and the sixth graders made 89.5, so just about 90%. So when placing this, let's see if I can get him to stick on here. Oh, let's see. Having a little trouble with our board today. They are basically like right at 90%. If I can slide them over. So they are a little bit farther up on our scale here. Again, we're having a little technical difficulty with our sticky notes. But they're going to be right in front of that line. A little bit more than Mr. Lehner. So when I look at the percentages, the sixth graders are a slightly better free throw shooting group than Mr. Lehner is based off of our benchmark fractions and percents up here. So when working with these percents, finding percent of a number can be very helpful when determining free throw shooting. One of the things that you might do at home is to just grab your basketball. Maybe have a free throw contest with a friend. Start shooting some free throws and use some math in there. Who's the better free throw shooter, you or your friend? And find the actual percents of your free throws made. Thank you for tuning in to Mr. Lehner's Math Extravaganza. Hopefully you practice some free throws. As always, we'll see you next time.